Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. When it comes to the vendor and buyer and who is responsible when there is a fraudulent payment, well, that can depend on the country. So here's what happened in another court case. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 344. Another fraudulent payment after a BEC scam goes to court. Who won? Now, I say another fraudulent payment after a BEC scam goes to court because I did one earlier this year. It was episode 323, and it was just titled A Fraudulent Payment After a BEC Scam Goes to Court. Who won? Now, when we talk about business email compromise or BEC, that is where it's just like the traditional scam where fraudulent bank details are received that diverts the payment from the vendor or from the buyer to the vendor. And so when that happens, the question is who's going to pay? Is it going to be the buyer because they did not pay the vendor technically, or is it the vendor because, and I think in that first one, it was that the vendor allowed their email address or account to be hijacked, and so that's how they got in. And so the question was: is the onus on the buyer or on the vendor to take the loss? Now, if you want to see what happened, or if you want to listen to what happened in the first case, you can go again to episode 323 and listen to that. Now, keep in mind that one was or the country that one was in was Australia. Now, that had a two things I think that are different, at least from this one. In Australia, really based on this court's decision, it really highlights two things. Really, one is that if the threat actor infiltrates the vendor's business email accounts, then the court's decision will not rule out the possibility that the vendor might be liable if they could have reasonably prevented, right, that email hijacking, keeping the fraudsters out. Now, the second decision that came out of that ruling or really highlights is that if the business erroneously, meaning the buyer, meaning your company, pays an invoice through fraud, that the buyer might be liable to pay the legitimate invoice. And so those are two things that Australia's courts look at and definitely happened in this case. And if you want to see who won and why, like who breached one of those two decisions, either the buyer by erroneously paying an invoice that they should have caught, or the vendor by allowing a hacker to get into their email and send a legitimate request for bank change. I don't know if I clarify why that was an issue that the hijackers got into the vendor's email account, but it was just that to send what appeared to be a legitimate request to change banking because it came from the vendor's actual email inbox. So anyway, that was Australia, and if you want to again listen to that podcast episode, it was 323, and you can see who won that one. Now, in talking about the one for today, this one is actually from South Africa. And South Africa, the Supreme Court takes a very different approach. Now, the case involved cybercrime, and the Supreme Court of Appeals ruled in this court case. So let's start with what originally happened. Now, what happened here is these two parties, looks like they were car dealerships, and this was back in October of 2018. And Hyundai purchased two Nissan Backies, Bakkies, whatever those are, from Northcliffe Nissan for a sum of money, and Northcliffe Nissan then emailed the invoices for both vehicles to the buyer. Now, the invoices themselves provided details of the nominated bank account for payment of the purchase price for the backies. So they sent the emails through. Now, on the same day, Hyundai paid for one Backie and then emailed proof of payment to Northcliffe Nissan, the vendor, after which the Backie was delivered. And then a few days later, Hyundai made another payment and took delivery of the second Backie. Now, at that part or stage, neither one of them realized that cyber criminals were at work. They found out about a week later that the payment that Hyundai made didn't make it into Northcliffe Nissan's bank account, and it appeared, or became clear, I should say, that the emails were intercepted and the bank account details on the invoices were altered by a cyber fraudster. So when Northcliffe Nissan sent the invoices with the banking information for payment to be made, those invoices were intercepted and the bank account was changed to the fraudulent bank account. And so the question they had was, well, who is supposed to pay? And so Northcliffe Nissan didn't want to be out of the money for the two vehicles or Bakis, and then Hyundai did not want to pay twice. Now, again, this is just like that other court case that I just told you about in episode 323. So again, things can be different in different countries. So if you're dealing with vendors in different countries, they could be, if you have a fraudulent payment, it could be treated much differently. So we talked about the two different decision highlights from the one in episode 323. In this one, though, there is only one upheld decision, and that was upheld at the Supreme Court level or the Supreme Court of Appeal level, and that is that when a payment is made via electronic transfer, EFT, it is only complete when the funds are received by the correct account holder. And so in that case, that means that Hyundai is on the hook for paying twice because they did not send the original funds to the right account holder. Now, again, this went up to the higher court, and what the lower court said when they first ruled was that the two car dealerships had a contract in place, and cybercrime or not, Northcliffe Nissan was due payment for the two Bakis or however you pronounce those. But it could be any products that maybe you were paying your vendor for and your vendor never received. Again, if they were in South Africa. Now, if your vendor was in Australia and the jurisdiction was Australia, it might be different. It may be that the court will look at whether or not prevented access to their email account so that no fraudster could hijack it and send a request to change banking. They'll also would look at, again, if you're in Australia, whether or not on your side, right, the buyer followed their process to make sure that they paid the right vendor. And so again, it just depends on country. So as I see these coming in for court, and I am sure there are probably more of them out there, definitely more to come, I will go ahead and have those be a podcast episode because again, it could be different based on what country has jurisdiction, right? Whether it's the US or another country, maybe where your vendor is located. So I will continue to post these as I see them. But what I will say is no matter what country you are in or your vendor is in, you need to have authentication techniques, best practices, internal controls, vendor validations in order to avoid fraud, even if your vendor uh, allowed or their security around their email did not prevent a hijacker from getting into their email account and did not prevent them from sending a request to you to change their banking. And because it came from the vendor's email address, you thought it was valid, and so it was updated. So no matter what happens, you need to make sure that you have processes in place that will catch the fraud before fraudulent payment is made, even if that happened. And so I am going to link in the show notes the first step I think that everyone needs to take, and that is training on authentication. Now, this is making sure that you know who you are communicating with when you are receiving an email to say, hey, change my banking, or maybe even a phone call, right, to say, how do I change my banking? That can be a fraudster when it's coming through email, whether the banking information is embedded in the email or maybe they have a banking details on letterhead, bank or vendor letterhead. However, it's received, you need to make sure you know who you're getting that from. And then beyond that, other internal controls, such as having your own banking form and not just accepting what they give you, because that can be an obstacle that you just put in their way, because it's very easy to just take what they give you, and it's easier for them too. So don't make it easy on them. Also, a big thing here is it appears that in this case, they took the banking details from the invoice. And you should never take banking details from an invoice because, as we can see in this example, they can be forged. So, again, that internal control of requiring your own bank customized vendor banking form can deter some of those fraudsters and definitely the lazy ones. And you also want to make sure that on that form, you are including authenticating data as well. And so, again, I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the authentication training session, which is free. And I think that definitely needs to be the first thing that you do. But then the second thing is you need to make sure you have your own vendor banking form. Now, that is not free, but I will put a link in the show notes to where you can get a template banking form in order to make sure that you are capturing authenticated data and you're just putting obstacles in the way. And I think on the page where I have the bank account or the vendor banking form template, you can actually see the fields that I include. And so you want to make sure you take a look at that, even if you have a vendor banking form, or maybe you want to create your own. Take a look at that, see what fields, if you have a banking form, that see what fields you might be able to add to it that will make it more secure. And if you don't have a banking setup form, a vendor banking form, and you want to create your own, you can use that as your guide as to what fields to include on it, or you can purchase it as a part of the vendor toolkit. I actually do have it as a separate purchase. I'll put that also in the show notes as well. So, and I think on one of those pages I'm going to send you to, it does show you what it looks like. So you can just kind of easily copy what you don't have to your existing form, or create an existing form, or just buy that template and have it done for you and do some minimal customization, such as your logo, your address information, and then go ahead and start using that. Because had that form been used as a part of this particular case, it might have saved that fraudulent payment, because a lot of times fraudsters will just abandon the request. Definitely if you push back and ask authenticating questions on the phone, they may just hang up, because it's more than what other people are doing, and they may just want to go to the next potential victim that's not asking those things that you are asking. So if it's between you and someone else will just accept the banking information that they gave them in email without requiring their own form, additional information, then it's easier for them to do that. And so don't make it easy for them. Add authentication techniques, internal controls, best practices, vendor validations, so that you can make sure that even if a fraudulent email gets through, that a fraudulent payment is not made. So those are just really two steps, but I think there are two great steps to start with. And then make sure, if you don't already, sign up for my newsletter when you get to either one of those sites, so that you can get more information on how to avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. Oh, and keep listening to the podcast. All right. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 334th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.